Welcome to the 902 podcast, the official podcast of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Captain John Vik, and I want to thank you for listening. This podcast will give you an inside look at LSO, with topics and guests to discuss public safety issues impacting Lancaster County. Be sure to subscribe for highlights on news, cases, and the people working for you at LSO. You can also follow us across social media at LSO Nebraska on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Hey, Captain Vik with you in studio today. We're going to take a look back at the 902 podcast's most popular episodes of 2024. We're going to get started with episode 58, coming in at the 10th position in our top 10 list. Episode 58 was Into the Storm, when we looked back at the 20th anniversary of the Hallam tornado. Obviously, a very historical event in Lancaster County, and it was timely, as around the time we recorded this episode, we were just recovering from the Arbor Day tornadoes that struck in 2024. Let's give a listen into episode 58. The tornado actually started down west of Dakin and went as far as Palmyra. Hallam was almost in the middle of that track. And at the time, they didn't know it that night, but the following day, I think they classified it as an F4 tornado, and winds reported more than 200 miles an hour and a track of about 55 miles. And at the time, I think, Sheriff, I think there's been one since, but it was the widest tornado on record.
2.5 miles wide.
Yeah.
And 56 miles long. Yeah.
And an F4, unfortunately for the people of Hallam, right as it was hitting town. So, yeah, pretty crazy stuff. So we talked about, they initially chose Norris High School as kind of the collection point or the reunification point, and that ended up not being the best point. I know, talking to Captain Scriven, he's Deputy Scriven at the time, but he was standing on the edge of town just trying to direct people away because I think there was so much congestion, and it wasn't until hours later that he found out that Norris wasn't a great place to be sending people either.
Right. It was, the whole old gymnasium area, and it was completely collapsed. Yeah, all that collapsed down. And as you drove, when it got daylight out, you could actually see. But you could see that. For years, you could see that path. Mm-hmm. It took all across the county, and it was just like a saw blade went through everything.
Ben, what was your role that night?
Well, they sent out, I believe, a page. We used to carry pagers for the SWAT team, and we got notified, and we are one of the groups that can gather quickly and get to where we needed to go. And I was the team leader at that point in time, and I remember stopping off at the office thinking, I'm going to be real bright and make some copies of Hallam, and so we can hand them out as we're going along and checking, and driving down there, and it was still storming when I was going down through there. And I can remember parking, and it felt like your car was going to slide. It was so windy, and because it was like 3 different storms went through there on that night. And but I remember getting it and having the maps and just throwing them back into my car because absolutely nothing looked the same as what it did that night. I can just remember, you were walking around in the water, like Jason said, and you were worried about the power lines being out. There was so much debris. I was just really, truly amazed we didn't have more people injured who were out just searching and doing that. And my group, I was the sergeant in criminal that time, so the one fatality, we ended up working and doing that part of it.
So what happened? What happened there?
You know what? She didn't make it she probably stayed upstairs too long and was right at the edge of the stairway when the tornado hit her house, and she died of blunt force trauma.
And just couldn't make it to the safe part of the house in time.
Nope. And I think if she could have got downstairs, she would have been fine. She just didn't there. And she was a little bit more elderly too. So I think the time of day it ended up hitting was a blessing because, again, like Jason said, there was more people out and a lot of people were in Lincoln. And so we didn't have as many people at home as what we thought. But, being through one of those storms when it's that dark out and you can't see what's coming, and it was like it was eerie. It was scary because
rain wrap.
It was
didn't know where it was at. And just remember the train. I mean, the train. The huge grain elevator trains ran through there, and then that whole thing was pushed.
Tipped over like
whole thing like nothing. I mean, it was just
like matchbox cars. They were just turned over and all that, and it was just amazing. You don't expect wind and all that nature to have that much power, but it took some major buildings and heavy equipment and tossed it like it wasn't anything.
Well, you and I were talking a little bit when we were preparing for this, and we'll talk about this. That's going to bring us to our number 9 spot on the top 10 episodes of 2024. Coming in at number 9, episode 61 with the Lancaster County Attorney's Office. And in this episode, Lancaster County Attorney Pat Condon and Chief Deputy Lancaster County Attorney Chris Turner came and joined the 902 podcast to talk about the operations of their office. Let's listen in. For people that are listening at home, and it can get confusing to, some of the terminology on, you're the county attorney, you're the prosecutor. Some places would call it a DA. How, for somebody that's, maybe they just watch Law and Order on TV and that's about the extent of their legal knowledge. Maybe count me in that group sometimes. maybe not. I don't know. But how would you describe your office's jurisdiction to somebody that's listening at home as? Is it just the four corners of Lancaster County? Are there other roles and responsibilities that you have as you're technically the chief law enforcement officer in Lancaster County? So what does that mean to Pat Condon?
Well, I mean, generally, yes, it's going to be what's going on here in Lancaster County, and that's what we're going to be looking at. But also we are involved in other organizations, our County Attorneys Association, I think there is some expectation that the county attorney in Lancaster and Douglas and Sarpy are going to be kind of leaders of the County Attorneys Association for Nebraska. But no, like Paul Schaub is the president of our County Attorneys Association. He's from Cheyenne County. And that's what's really, and I'm sure the sheriff, I'm sure you all know. I mean, the difference between being in an urban and a rural district. I mean, and that's some of the things that we struggle with our problem-solving courts. How do we make a problem-solving courts that work well in an urban setting? Yep. But then you move them out to the rural setting, and then what do you do with them when you have a judge that's there once a week or once every 2 weeks, and you don't have the service providers that you have, and so that's what we're looking at is how can we, aside from keeping what we're doing here in Lancaster County and focusing on that, but also focusing on the rest of the state and making, the process or making the system work for other areas of the state.
We talked about problem-solving courts a few times now, and that's certainly one of your priorities and focuses as an office. Are there any other focuses or things that are just strategically important to the Lancaster County Attorney's Office right now as far as priorities?
Yeah, I think the problem-solving courts is definitely a high one that is done in conjunction with the district courts in Lancaster County. Our office, along with community corrections, is developing a number of problem-solving programs that are done completely within the purview of the county attorney's office to identify who should be eligible for those and what those programming requirements should look like to try to give people the best shot at dealing with whatever problems cause them to make the mistakes that they have, and then hopefully lower the chance of recidivism. But other things that we're always actively doing is trying to identify areas of improvement. And so a lot of times that's trying to identify ways to collect more information and determine which programs are the most successful and which aspects of those programs lead to the best success rates. Same thing with how we process our cases, how quickly we can ensure that adequate decisions are made on charging and communications with victims and the courts. And so that's just an ongoing process that we're always looking at improving.
Next up on the list, number 8, episode 50, Law Enforcement Communication with Cynthia Lewis. And in this episode, we had a chance to visit with Cynthia, who's an instructor at the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia. And Cynthia talked about the importance of teaching and instructing the next generation of leaders in the arts and science of law enforcement communication. Well, Cynthia, I know we're getting close to the end of our time here, but any other topics or anything else going on at the training unit that you want to talk about?
One of the things I would like to mention from the writing class, now we have a graduate level writing course. This is a great opportunity for National Academy students to share their expertises. I have a block on publishing, and that has been a great outlet for National Academy students. Often they don't realize how much information, knowledge, and experience they have to share.
Yeah.
So doing something like a podcast or writing an article for publication, that's one of the requirements for the writing course. And now with so many students able to publish articles, we are publishing a lot of them through the FBI's Law Enforcement Bulletin. And that's just another way to get information out there to train mid to upper level management leaders around the world because of just the international readership that most of these law enforcement publications have. That's been, I think, one of the biggest impacts I've seen from National Academy students to see themselves create podcasts or to get published, to know that they can get their information and share it with others.
Well, I still owe you an article for the bulletin, and I'm looking forward to do that. Ben keeps putting work on my desk.
Well, I try. I'm
just whining.
I do have one. What is your, of all the classes you've taught and done that, what is your most favorite one and why?
You don't mean session number, do you? Because
well,
right now
284 was the best.
Number.
Yeah, everybody knows that.
You have to say that no matter who's in the room. That person's session is the best.
I hear you.
I love it's interesting because I love the writing because that's my background. I love the public speaking as well because I was so afraid to speak in public about 20 years ago. I would have never thought I would not only be giving presentations, but I'd be teaching other people. I've come so far learning from National Academy students and I like to share and give back what's helped me. I procrastinated writing and I would procrastinate giving a presentation. Both of those, I probably about the same. I've just learned so much, and I like to share what I've found out to be true about those two topics with as many people as possible.
I should have put Toastmasters on here too, Cynthia. I'm looking at my notes, and I didn't even bring up Toastmasters. But are you still active in that chapter out there?
Yes, we have the FBI Academy has a club. FBI headquarters has one, and I'm still active in the one at the Academy, and I helped co-found one in my hometown, which is a rural area, and probably the closest Toastmasters club is an hour to hour and a half from there, and that's continuing to grow. So I just gave a speech last week. I'm still trying to improve my skills. I might teach writing and teach public speaking, but I'm still trying to improve, hopefully to get better in all of these skills as well. It never ends. It's lifelong learning.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that you say that because, for the vast majority of people, and I remember Jim Vance telling us this, that public speaking is very uncomfortable. It's just not natural. And you have to use some of those techniques and to overcome that fear. But I remember in our course, in Jim's course, if we were going to give a speech, we had to wear a suit that day. I don't know if that's still the case at Quantico or not.
Yes, it's not as much for the.
Next up on the list, and staying with the FBI theme, our number 7 spot from 2024 goes to episode 49 inside the FBI's Omaha field office with Special Agent in Charge Eugene Cowell. Gene stopped down to the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office earlier this year to talk about the relationship between LSO and the Omaha field office and the resources that the FBI provides right here in Lincoln, Nebraska. There are a lot of federal law enforcement agencies. We run into the same thing, and one of the things I know, the sheriff, when you go out and talk to public groups, sometimes you have to explain the difference between this is what a sheriff's office does versus what a police department does. Mm-hmm. For our listeners that maybe don't know, there are a lot of agencies in the federal government: the DEA, the ATF, the FBI, Homeland Security now started after 9/11. What is the FBI's mission, and what is the FBI's, I guess, directive, if you will?
What sets it apart from the other federal agencies?
Sure, that's a great question. You know, there's so many very impactful federal law enforcement agencies. I think what sets the FBI apart is the breadth of our mission. We have a very broad mission. We cover a lot of territory. On the other hand, we don't do anything by ourselves. Mm-hmm. I used to say, except for maybe our most sophisticated or sensitive public corruption or counterintelligence investigations, but even those, we always bring in partners. The FBI number one priority is counterterrorism. Mm-hmm. That's both international terrorism, which are people here inspired by overseas movements, whether it's ISIS, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, and then domestic terrorism, people inspired by sort of local events in our country to commit an act of violence. Think of like the Oklahoma City bombing. With all those crimes, we work with a lot of different partners, and we've seen it change a lot, mm-hmm. right? 20 years ago, we were seeing, you think about 9/11, a very orchestrated plot of people sent over by Al-Qaeda, trained by Al-Qaeda, funded by Al-Qaeda to kill U.S. citizens on American soil. But over time, you think back, we just last year had the 10-year, commemoration of the Boston bombing. We started to see these events of people who received no training from overseas, no direction from overseas, but they were inspired by terrorist groups and committed horrific attacks. You think of the Pulse nightclub shooting, other events like that. So that's what we're most worried about in the terrorism side is what we call homegrown violent extremists. The number two threat that we work in the U.S. that I would say other agencies that you named don't is counterintelligence. And we used to never talk about this, but now we talk about it quite a bit. And that's the threat posed by nation-state adversaries. And there's a big four that you probably all can name yourself, but it's the People's Republic of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And they all have different agendas, both to steal information, to destabilize the U.S., and perhaps, especially in the case of the People's Republic of China, to be able to inflict harm on the U.S. should there be a conflict. And just last week, the director announced an operation where we detected Chinese hackers who had embedded themselves on servers in the United States and in our critical infrastructure. We're talking about water treatment facilities, transportation hubs, power grids. And the only reason they'd be there is should there be a conflict, perhaps over Taiwan or some other military conflict, to really impose pain and suffering on U.S. citizens, right? Mm-hmm. There's no economic benefit to being in our wastewater infrastructure. But there is a big benefit if you can deny our ability to have clean water during a time of conflict. That could wreak a lot of havoc.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, it brings a lot of fear, too, that somebody can get in here and do that in the United States. I think the citizens begin to think, what the heck else can they do? And to harm us at that. Is China our number one concern at this point in time out of those four?
Yes, from a counterintelligence perspective, China's the number one concern. I mean, China has said publicly they want to be the world's number one superpower. And they've outlined a plan of how they're going to do that. It's a very public plan. And, I don't think any of us want our children or our grandchildren to really live in a world where the Communist Party of China is sort of the dominant governing structure or superpower in the world. Mm-hmm. And this is a threat even here for us in Nebraska, not just because we have STRATCOM and other things like that, but you even think about agriculture, right? Our number one industry here. Well, what's China? China's a country that has, it has 22% of the world's population, 6% of the world's arable land, which means they can't grow enough food for their people. And that's a national security issue for them. That results in great trade for us. But it also means China will do whatever they can and has. And we've seen examples of this, of stealing our agricultural technology. I mean, there's a reason why American farmers and ranchers are the most productive in the world. And it's not just because of our natural resources. It's because of the innovation that we bring to the industry. Yeah. And we've had cases where people working on behalf of corporations connected to the government of China have stolen proprietary corn seed worth millions of dollars. We also see
Something you never.
Speaking of federal partners, number 6 on our list of 2024 episodes brings us to episode 69. And a former LSO deputy, Special Agent Christina Worcester, now with Homeland Security Investigations, joined us to talk about the topic of human trafficking. We discussed what it is and what's being done to combat human trafficking right here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and all across the world. When you started there at Homeland Security, was it specifically for human trafficking that you went there, or really all investigations?
No, it's all investigations. So you go through a 7-month academy. Mm-hmm. The first 3 months is with the National Training Center, and then the following 3 months, 3.5 months, is with HSI specifically. It's called an add-on, and you learn about all of the authorities that HSI has nationwide and abroad. And then you go back to your home office, which I came right back to Omaha under a direct hire. So I was very lucky. Yeah. But one thing HSI is really good at is they really try to put you where you're going to thrive, like what you're interested in.
Right.
And so I actually started in child sexual abuse material cases, child pornography, production of child pornography. And then I kind of just got thrusted into a juvenile sex trafficking case.
So we trained her for that.
Ready to go.
Yeah.
100%. And then I was nervous about it, but it was something I'd never done, and it was interesting to me, and it was like right in my wheelhouse, holding people accountable who hurt children or vulnerable parts of our community. And then that's all I've done since 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad you're here today. Human trafficking, something's talked about a lot. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people just in the general public they hear that term and they're like, well, that's bad. Human trafficking's bad. But if they were, to have to put a definition on it, it's one of those things. Well, what is it? So what is human trafficking? What are we really talking about when we're saying that?
I'm going to kind of split it into 2 parts. When we're talking about human trafficking, and I'm only going to talk mostly today about sex trafficking because that's what I'm most experienced in. But obviously there's sex trafficking and labor trafficking. One is commercial sex and the other is forced labor.
Okay.
But when we're talking about commercial sex or sex trafficking, we're talking about splitting it between adults and juveniles. So when we talk about adults, it's when someone uses force, fraud, or coercion to push somebody or to coerce them into commercial sex. Mm-hmm. That's one way to think about it. And then with juveniles, what we try to really make everyone understand is that none of those things have to exist. Mm-hmm. It's just that if you exchange anything of value with a child under the age of 18, federally, under the age of 19 for the state statute, in exchange for commercial sex, that is a crime. And people think, well, that's money. It's not just money. It's drugs. It's a place to stay. It's a ride to or from a place. Any of that is value, and you will see criminals use that to exploit these children who are vulnerable.
Do you ever get the argument, especially more about adult trafficking, and say, well, how do you distinguish between prostitution and sex trafficking?
It is the voluntariness of it. So if an adult female, mostly adult females, participate in prostitution, although it's illegal, they're doing it on their own free will.
Right.
They're doing it out of their own conscience of what they want to do. When we're talking about trafficking, we're talking about someone is exploiting a vulnerability that they have in exchange for them taking that money from them.
Okay.
So they're forcing them into that sex act with like force, like assaults, coercion, like I will call CPS and have your kids removed. I will call immigration. I will report you to Health and Human Services. That would be like a type of coercion. And then obviously fraud, making them think it's something that it's definitely not. And we see that a lot with like massage parlors or illicit massage parlors that are telling these people they're going to come in and do massages, and then ultimately they're participating in commercial sex.
And it's probably a fine line that you're walking sometimes, because I'm sure the people that are perpetrating these trafficking schemes, that's probably exactly when they want to back out and say, well, no, these people are just doing that on their own, free will.
Every single suspect that I've ever interviewed has told me that.
Yeah.
So it's important for the investigators to have a lot of evidence when we're dealing with traffickers. Personality-wise, they're all very narcissistic. They think a lot of themselves. They're mostly like pretty well educated as far as street smart. And so you have to be able to leverage the evidence against them to kind of get past that. But that's almost always what traffickers or pimps are going to say is that, well, this is voluntary, or, oh, I was just trying to help this girl out and she wanted to do this. I was just providing security. Those are all common defenses.
That brings us into the top 5. Now with the number 5 episode of 2024, we'll go back to February when we had episode 48, Force Investigations, with investigator Jeremy Schwarz. And investigator Schwarz spends a good deal of his time investigating use of force incidents and also reviewing force incidents for the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. Listen in as he talks about how that works. Walk through, an officer involved shooting happens, and this could happen for any type of force investigation. It doesn't have to be a shooting. Sometimes it could be, just a hand-to-hand type of force that we're looking at. But I think for simplicity's sake, we're going to focus more on officer involved shootings because those are probably the bigger ones that we would employ the force investigation team for. But let's talk a little bit about what happens after that shooting takes place. A lot of times it'll start with some sort of call, some sort of law enforcement response, and sometimes these things go very quickly out in the field. And it can go. We'll talk about a few examples here, but what can start out as a fairly benign contact without a whole lot of indication that something is going to go wrong, within a matter of seconds. Sometimes you can hear on the radio, "Shots fired. I've got a party down. Start medical."
Right.
And I guess that's really kind of how this whole process gets started. So what happens after that?
Well, the thing too, we got, the reason why this unit was started, the sheriff has a choice. He can have us investigate it. He can have an outside agency investigate it, or have the force team investigate it. So a lot of times I would say we don't, if it's our deputies, we're probably not going to be, I guess, the lead agency in investigating that. And that's for the transparency part of it. So
correct.
That's with our team on that. I guess with the Nebraska State Patrol and the Lincoln Police Department, that's when they are involved in something and we aren't. That's when our unit ends up going and being the lead agency in those incidents.
So generally, regardless of who conducts the investigation, though, we're starting 2 separate but parallel investigations at that point.
That's right.
And so let's focus first on the criminal. We'll call it the criminal side of the investigation to make sure that the force that was used was lawful. So regardless of which agency, which agency takes that assignment, what are kind of some of the things that are going on after the smoke clears, so to speak?
Well, I'll take you to just kind of a general, once the shots are fired, the radio call's made, and medical shows up, the officer or officers, whether that be from the sheriff's office, the Lincoln Police Department, or the Nebraska State Patrol, or even a federal agency that we may partner with, at the scene, those officers they're separated. They're treated for medical issues if that needs to be addressed. And then most importantly, a supervisor is reaching out to those officers involved in going over a public safety statement. And that's to obtain critical information that's necessary for the start of the investigation. And those are questions. There's roughly, I want to say 8 to 9. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ben.
They are 7.
7. And those questions are asked, and we use that information to start our investigation. And then those officers are assigned a peer support and evidence officer. And then Those officers are transported back to their respective team station, or here at the sheriff's office, at the Hall of Justice, or even the Nebraska State Patrol. And from there, that's where they have an opportunity to meet with their union lawyer. And then that's where the collection of evidence takes place. And they have a chance to talk with their command staff about what the next process is for them in terms of administrative leave. And then we designate a time to have a interview.
Moving on our list, we're down to number 4 in the top 10 episodes of 2024. We'll go to episode 52, which takes us really all the way back to 1829 when Sir Robert Peel established the London Metropolitan Police Force. And he also based it on the foundations of his 9 principles of policing. Those are principles which we still use as a foundation for much of what we do here at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office right now in 2024. Let's give a listen in to episode 52, Sir Robert Peel's 9 Principles of Policing. The basic mission for which police exist is to prevent crime and disorder as an alternative to the repression of crime and disorder by military force and severity of legal punishment. Now, what that kind of means to us in modern context is that once upon a time, police forces were largely military, and it was the military force of the government that kept societies in order from ancient times through the Middle Ages, really up to the modern era. Sheriffs, as we've discussed all the way back in episode 0, were the first non-military law enforcement officials in recorded history. And that's kind of unfolded since then. So that's why the basic mission for which police exist, and sheriffs in our case, is to prevent crime and disorder and put together programs and tactics and procedures that hopefully, if we're doing things right, will prevent crime and disorder from occurring as an alternative to the repression of crime and disorder by force and severity of legal punishment. Now, certainly just by the nature of things, we still have to maintain law and order, and law enforcement does still maintain somewhat of a judicial hammer, so to speak, as a part of the bigger legal process. But just simply enforcing and making arrests, trying to compel that compliance from people is really secondary to our primary goal, which is hopefully to prevent crime and disorder from happening in the first place. So then we'll move on to the second Peelian principle, and that's the ability of the police to perform their duties as dependent upon public approval of police existence, actions, behavior, and the ability of the police to secure and maintain public respect. Big reason for why we even do the podcast in the first place is to try to gain that public trust and that public respect and provide you as our listeners with an understanding for why we do what we do and how we do it. So again, the ability of the police to perform their duties is dependent on exactly that, on the public approval of what we're doing, our existence, our actions, our behaviors, and our ability to secure and maintain that public respect and trust. Those things all work together to be able to make sure that we're having a Lancaster County that's a safe place to live, work, and play. Moving on in our countdown, we've arrived at the top 3. In the number 3 spot in the top episodes of 2024, we get to episode 45, Crash Reconstruction. We talked with a number of us, the sheriff, myself, Sergeant Drew Bolzer, about how crash reconstruction works at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. Let's run us through maybe an evolution of the equipment, from...
Let me start.
Go ahead.
Because I had a go bag.
Okay.
And I had a pair of Sheriff's Office coveralls, just brown coveralls with said sheriff on them so that you didn't get all oily and greasy in your either uniform or other clothes. I carried 2 100-foot tape measures, not one, two.
Okay.
I had biggest spike nails I could find with a hammer, so I could pound the nails in and hang my roller tapes or my tapes on there. Had a roll of tape. Carried crayons, contractor's crayons, because I used to use chalk, but if it's seen as wet or there's fuel or antifreeze, crayons don't write very well. So you use contractor's chalk, so I just had a bunch of those little line level and plumb bob and a 1,000-foot line and line level and all that sort of thing. So that all changed with introduction of the total stations. That was the first advance in technology, I think, was total station.
That's what I remember doing.
Which I never used.
Yeah, on our training days. So our crash team trains once a month.
Yep.
Like some of our other specialized units. But when you and I got started, that's what we would spend our Wednesdays doing. Was we'd take an intersection in the county, and we would try to work ahead for ourselves and diagram it with the total station.
Yeah, like with most technology, if you aren't using it every day, you lose it. So I guess I want to talk about the technology, but maybe this is a good time for me to kind of give kudos to those of you at the table. Our command staff, including the sheriff, has understood the importance of accident reconstruction, and our department is very fortunate to have the access to the equipment we have access to the training we have, and not many agencies can say that they have the equipment training that we do. I think our unit is second to none, and that's because of you guys, and I do appreciate that. With that being said, technology is very important because it is very technical, and if you're trying to prove a motor vehicle homicide case and you're going to take somebody's rights away from them and you're going to put them in prison, you got to have the evidence to do it. And I think a lot of times people just take the inherent risk with a motor vehicle and understand that, if you're killing somebody with a car, it's no different than with a gun. It's just a different means of doing that. So we treat those as homicide investigations. They get the same attention to detail. And a lot of this technology is used hand in hand with our crime scene investigation team. So the total station started out, and really we borrowed a lot of stuff from the civil engineering world. They were already measuring things very precisely, almost to a 10,000th of an inch, and we took that over to the crash reconstruction world, and we had a total station for quite some time that one person held
the dummy end,
a reflector, and that's where the point in you were measuring your evidence. And then the total station was set up in an area that you could view most of your crash scene, but you always had to move it, and that was kind of a arduous task, and you have to relocate it and then make sure your measurements from the last one are the same. And then we were fortunate enough early on when I started, we got a robotics total station. So it changed it from a one-man operation or a two-man operation to a one-man operation. So you could just go around and you ran everything from, as Ben said, the dummy end. You just held it from the reflector and it put your points in, but you may have on a big crash scene, if you're measuring roadway widths, evidence, gouge marks, vehicle position, tire marks, you might have 250 to 500 points that you're going to do over a couple hour period. And that robotic total station changed the game for us. I mean, it really sped up our investigations. And then in 2015, when we held the conference here for MATI, we brought some vendors in with that. And one of those vendors at the time was Vittoro, and they're German manufacturer of 3D scanning. And it allows us to, instead of getting 250 to 500 points in a crash scene over the course of 3 to 4 hours, we could get probably 250 to 500 million points in that crash scene in less than an hour. And it is very precise technology, and we can use it for crime scenes. We can use it for crash scenes. We can use it for anything where we want to accurately depict the exact situation in which this event occurred. And it basically just creates a 3D model of the scene, and we can go back and later measure where if you were on a crash scene and you're measuring with a total station and you missed a point. You never got that point back. You could never figure out what that measurement was. Now with the Vittoro and the 3D technology, we can always go back and take a measurement anywhere we want, and especially if it gets into court and the jury has a question, how far away was this and how tall was this and really how long was this, we can go back in that software and measure it and get a very precise measurement where we were never able to do that before.
Coming in at our number 2 spot in the top episodes of 2024, episode 44 was about license plate readers, and this is new technology that we're using and deploying in Lancaster County to make it harder for criminals to carry out their crimes without being detected, but also to help keep Lancaster County residents safe. Let's listen in. There's a camera sitting on your car.
Correct.
That looks at license plates.
Yeah, so they're just aimed. They're at a set location on our vehicles. They don't, it's not like a robot where you can move them around. They're at a set location, tightened down so they don't move. Obviously, the road's rough. The median's rough. There's big bumps in the road, especially this time of year with the potholes. But so that camera's at a specific place, mounted in a position where it's going to get the most reads off license plates. Because otherwise, nothing is saved other than, like, say it's running a video feed 24/7. The only thing that's saved on that is each license plate. Everything else is just gone, right? So it's not like you can go back and look at, I want to see at the video. There's no such thing. All it is the pictures that are taken.
And so then it takes the license plate numbers that it sees and it compares those against an existing law enforcement database.
Correct.
So how is that any different than if you were just sitting on the side of the road and looked at a license plate and typed it into the law enforcement database?
Exactly the same thing.
So really, the way I look at it is we're just leveraging technology to do what is already done by deputies,
right?
But on a higher volume basis, because the technology can do it more efficiently than what you and your deputies can do.
Right, and the advantage, it does it multiple times when you're up there, as opposed to, say, a car goes by you and you don't read the plate because you're not used to reading an Indiana plate with 6 letters and 3 or 6 numbers and three letters on it, and you can see that picture, and then you can check to see, as opposed to maybe you have to get out in traffic and follow it for 5 miles to get the plate number again to be like, oh, was this what I read with my eyes as it went by?
Yeah, you
have that photo right there, and you're not buzzing all over the place to try to catch up to it.
Yeah, well, and we'll get to this later too, but I know one of the allegations or the criticisms of LPR technology is that it would increase policing, and that that can have a different effect on certain demographics of the population. And I guess when I look at it that way, rather than having a deputy sitting on the side of the road and whether intentionally or not, we talk about implicit bias and things like that. If you're looking at a car, you have to use your eyes and say, I want to look at that car's license plate, write it down, run it through the database, and see if there's an issue with it. Versus, we take the human element out of it, and we're looking at all of the license plates that are coming by us and comparing those against that database.
Correct.
So it's almost an argument against that implicit bias that we could be interjecting unknowingly into which license plates we're running.
Correct.
Yeah. And with that, we've arrived at the number 1 spot on our top 10 episodes of 2024. And no surprise, this was a recap and an update of what was actually our most popular episode in 2023 as well. Episode 67 was Tyler Goodrich, 1 Year Missing, which we recorded just before the 1-year anniversary when Tyler went missing. And we spoke with investigator Jeremy Schwarz about some updates to the case, where we're at, and also information that we still need, all in the hopes of trying to locate Tyler Goodrich. And we wish nothing more than we could do an episode in 2025 about Tyler being located, and we hope that we can do that. Let's listen in to episode 67, Tyler Goodrich, 1 Year Missing. And that's really part of the mystery is
yes.
why why did his phone turn off, before he left the property? And that's something that we're working to try and determine.
Yeah, and it's never been back on.
No.
And so no financial activity on any of Tyler's accounts, at least that could be attributed, to what we would normally see if someone were to pop back on the grid, so to speak.
Right.
Well, he left without his wallet too. Isn't that correct?
No, he had.
Did he have his wallet?
He had his wallet and he had his phone. And those were the two things that he normally would go running with when he would leave the house. He always had those two items in his hand.
Okay. Let's go back to Marshall Vogel a little bit, because I know there's been a lot of scrutiny on him. And, that is, like you said, you start small. There was a domestic disturbance that occurred the night before.
Yes.
I don't know if I would call it an extra step, Ben, but and Sheriff, maybe in your time, we've probably done this before, but we don't do polygraphs in all of our cases.
No, we don't, especially, on a disturbance where there wasn't a crime, but this one grew very big, and you want to turn every stone you possibly can. And that is just one of the processes that we ended up wanting to do and doing it. And Marshall was more than willing to go and do that part of it. So that, it just shows how much, people were kind of saying he wasn't trying to help or do things. And that just isn't true at all. Everything we've asked from him, from searching several different times, the house, the cars, all that, him coming in, taking polygraphs, him being willing to meet with us and discuss. But I can feel he took a beating on social media for a while.
There were some logistical things that we had to work out, with him and with his attorney, to start things out. But
it started a little rough, but at the end it turned out very well.
But he's since passed the polygraph.
Yeah, and really, and I think what's important for folks to really know about that polygraph is that wasn't a formal request. That was more of just kind of an off-the-cuff comment based on some social media comments. And I just posed it to him. I said, why don't we just do a polygraph? Mm-hmm. And without hesitation, it was, yes. When do I need to come in? And really, at that point, I think he was in the office within a couple days, and the only reason for a couple days was just to give the polygraph examiner time to examine the case file and develop the questions they needed to ask Marshall.
Yeah,
and I was present, and he passed.
That brings us to the end of our top 10 episodes of 2024. And as we close out the year, we really hope that you enjoyed taking a look back at these episodes from the last year. And we're thankful that all of you chose to join us to listen to one, two, or all of our episodes that we have right here on the 902 podcast. Next year, we look forward to bringing you more content, more episodes, more information from behind the scenes on why we do what we do and how we do it at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to give us a review, send us a comment, drop us an email, reach out to us on social media. You can find us at LSO Nebraska on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. We're also on LinkedIn and, of course, on Spotify, where you can find the 902 podcast and all of our episodes, as well as Apple and anywhere else that you enjoy listening to podcasts. If you'd like to send us an email, you can send it to lso@lancaster.ne.gov. And if you're interested in career opportunities at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, find information at www.joinlso.com. We hope that all of you have a safe and prosperous 2025, and we look forward to seeing you next year.